Okay, okay, I think we might finally be good. Good Lord, it was such a process getting this thing live. Um, yeah, not only did I have to restart the stream on my end several times, but also for some reason, Google made me sign back into my YouTube account. Okay, sure, yeah. You do you out there, YouTube. Yeah, so hopefully this is actually working now. Those of you out there that are listening and everything, please let me know by starting to drop stuff in the chat. I see John Collins saying hello. Hello, John. Um, yeah, sorry I got started so late tonight, everybody. Johnny Maserati says hello. Um, yeah, cool. Sonic Hill says loud and clear. That's what I like to hear. Yeah, sorry about that, everybody. This was like wild technical difficulties, which I mean, it happens that way sometimes, you know. Anyhow, welcome to my monthly Tech Tips live stream. This is a wonderful project that has been sponsored by UltraPoi. I'm going to be using their awesome Orb Poi LED contact poi tonight. You, of course, can get a hold of a set of these by heading on over to ultrapoi.com and using the promo code DrexFactor with a 0 instead of an O. The topic of tonight's live stream is going to be point isolation polish. That is, we're going to be talking a little bit about the techniques behind point isolation stalls, how you can make them happen, and I'm going to give you a couple pointers of how I make them work for my own style, as well as at least one point isolation based trick or combo that I've been working on in the past few months that I just think looks cool as all get out and that I would love to share with you all. So, being as how I'm starting up late, I'm just going to go ahead and dive into our lesson for tonight. I hope y'all out there are cool with that. Let's do it. So, I'll go ahead and switch up the camera here. Ta-da! Welcome to my home studio. Yeah, so point isolations, and specifically point isolation stalls. I use them a lot in my style, especially recently. They've kind of become a little bit of an obsession these past few months. Also, if you're just joining us, it's the first time you're doing one of these live streams. So the way it works is I spend the first 30 minutes sharing some tips with you about my own techniques for poi spinning, and then we cap it off with a 30-minute Q&A at the end of the hour, which it usually goes longer than an hour, but it'll be at least an hour long. So you get half an hour of tips and a half an hour of Q&A. So if you have questions that you want to ask, please drop them into the chat. And of course, if you want to drop me a super chat as a tip, that is the big old button that looks like a dollar sign. It is much appreciated. It helps out the channel, and I will prioritize your question first. But first up, let's talk point isolations, because that's the basis of tonight's lesson. So the central idea behind point isolations themselves is we're basically taking this idea that we take for granted whenever we do a static spin. That is, you've got your hand in the middle of this kind of circle that the poi is tracing out and everything. Um, and we're kind of switching that up. So now it is the poi head in the center and your hand going around it. It's extraordinarily difficult to make that work for a full circle. But what you can do is you can do things like take it around for a half circle, for example, whether it be going over the poi head or whether it be going under the poi head. Doing a half circle is like relatively easy as these things go. But things start getting really interesting when we take it a quarter of a circle, and specifically a quarter of a circle with the hand going above the poi head. Why is this? Because it then cancels out whatever forces happen to be on the poi head so that we wind up in this lovely little place where the poi just stops moving like magic. Wahaha. Which, of course, we can do this out of a pendulum. We can also do it out of a static spin. We can also do this out of, like, if you're doing an in-spin flower, you can treat the pedals like a stall. You can even do this out of an anti-spin flower. Boom, like so. Um, you can do it out of literally any stall. So for example, if I were to do like a bottom stall, boom, I can do a little point isolation stall there. If I wanted to do an up stall, boom, I can have my hand go halfway around until it's above the poi head, boom, like such, and still achieve the same effect. I mean, down stall would be redundant, but I mean, could come out of it into something where you can do a point isolation stall. And finally, of course, there's the top stall. Yes, you can actually make this work off of a top stall. You have to be really quick about it though, because you only get like a half a second before the poi head starts dropping. So you have to really be Johnny on the spot with that, right? Literally, the way that you make this work is you just have this point at which the hand and the poi head are even in space. There's a nice horizontal line between them, and you make like the poi head just became riveted in space, and you rotate your hand around it like so. So as I'm doing a pendulum back and forth here and everything, if I just catch the poi head and move my hand directly above, it's the exact same mechanism. Back and forth, and boom, hand goes above the poi head and stops it completely in its tracks. Pretty awesome, right? In fact, you can just drill this by taking a pendulum straight back and forth and sticking your hand out over the poi head. One thing that's really important is making sure that your hand is actually traveling in a rounded line around that poi head, because if you try and do it as like a straight line, you're probably going to add a little bit of momentum onto that poi head, and it is not going to stall, which is really the goal here. Um, and also, of course, you want to make sure that the tether is taut the entire way through, because it just looks cooler. Um, so those are the basics of point isolation stalls. Now let's talk about some tips that are going to help you on like a performance level as well as to get these down. I'm moving a little stiff tonight because I've had some really nasty sciatica this week, um, but hopefully that doesn't impact my ability to spin that too terribly much. So one of the biggest things that I notice goes wrong when people try to do point isolations is they start from too high up. You notice how like I'm doing this pendulum right here, kind of close to my throat, because I'm like my brain is almost pre-preparing for the fact that I'm going to have to move my hand up. But the thing is that I'm not giving myself any room here to actually like do the up motion without having to strain my body in order to get there. You want to make sure that you're always beginning this from a spot that is either at shoulder level or below shoulder level. So you see here, I've got my pendulum going back and forth, and I'm never getting any higher than about the bottom of my chest, yeah? This is kind of the sweet spot for getting these down, because it gives your arm lots of room to be able to maneuver above. When I'm performing that point isolation here, look at my hand. It's no higher than about head height here, no higher than about eye level. If I can keep my hand at this level, that's a good place to be. Not the least of which because if I try and do it much higher than that, it creates a really strange line with my body where I, look like I'm going hip hip hooray. But like if I can more or less have my hand even with my shoulder, I think the effect looks a lot better there. It's a much more pleasing shape that you're creating with your body. So I'm always aiming to try and have the point that I'm doing the point isolation around no higher than about the bottom of my chest here. And that gives me that room to be able to get that point isolation stall in there. And more specifically, I'm getting that nice right angle shape between my arm and my body. I'm not messing around with any of those weird diagonals here, which it's really hard to do this and make it look good. There are, of course, some exceptions, like say, if you have two poi that are moving at different levels, you can really emphasize this either by working around the negative space of your shoulder, or even by using that relationship in such a way that it kind of frames your head like so. There's absolutely a place for that. Um, this, of course, also means too, though, that whenever you're playing around with a trick that you're going to use that point isolation on, so say like I want to come out of it, come into it out of these like horizontal stacks and everything here, boom. That also means that I have to take the stacks maybe a little bit lower than I normally would. Again, I'm trying to keep them below my shoulder line here. And then, of course, when I do the point isolation stall and everything, I'm kind of splitting the difference between like having my hands go a little bit up while still trying to keep the poi from dropping too much as they're going across here. Same thing with when I'm doing like an anti-spin flower. I can, boom, do those point isolation stalls coming off of doing a top and bottom stall over to the side here, yeah? And you'll note that when I do that, the point isolation stall isn't as clean as, say, when I'm doing it off of a pendulum, and that's because I have to give the poi a little bit of room to drop coming out of that, or else, once again, I run into the problem of reaching for the ceiling here as I'm trying to make that happen. So really think that you're aiming to have the point around which you're going to do that point isolation stall be a lot lower than you think it is. And this is like normally when I tell people to play around with their anti-spin flowers, I'm telling them to eat up space. I really want to see those horizontal petals, even with their shoulders. This is the one exception because, of course, if I do make them even with my shoulders, boom, I got to play around with those ugly lines. So this is the one and only time when I tell people, yeah, it's okay to take the anti-spin flowers a little bit further down so that you can really nail those point isolation stalls a lot cleaner. And of course, a lot of you who've watched my flow videos at this point know that I'm a big fan of doing these point isolation stalls out of basically any stall I can come up with, especially with flowers. Like I'm really enjoying taking any kind of opportunity to do like these in-spin flowers or out of like a body tracer, which is basically just an in-spin flower that's wrapped around the body. And just taking those moments where I have the poi kind of pointed at each other and closing them up and locking them tight. Of course, I showed off a version of this in a combo that I posted to Instagram yesterday where you can really like activate the body around this, Um, if you have a situation where the poi are operating on different levels here and everything, and you go for the point isolation, it's not just a matter of like getting your hands out, but really you can get your entire body into that too. Like you see how I'm picking up a leg to go with that? Um, or like you can do something like work a focus change into it, like really make the moment pop and do something with your presentation to let your audience know that there's something there that they should be paying attention to. It should also be said this is a great example for level, a great opportunity to do level changes. So if I'm getting low and everything, and I have my poi going over to one side, I can straighten up with my body right then, and that gives if I'm starting from low enough, that can actually give me an excuse to bring my body upward. And rather than playing with the awful line, I can instead bring my entire body up and save myself from doing the awful line and get myself into that right angle that I think is a lot better presentation for this. Yeah. So with all that said, I want to show y'all at least one thing that I've been doing with this concept lately that I just think is cool as heck and is probably going to wind up in an Instagram tutorial here within the next couple months. But essentially, it involves from a reverse butterfly here, I whoosh, kind of take this moment where the poi are coming up together through the middle and do my little point isolation stall here to get the two poi up in this space where they're directly in front of me. Now here's where it gets funny, or I guess interesting. So I'm going to take my right hand poi and I'm going to play like this is part of a two petal in spin flower. Yeah. Now, any petal in any flower can be thought of as a stall in itself. So I'm thinking that I've done a stall off of the top petal of a two petal in spin flower, and I'm going to go around and do another stall off of the bottom petal. So I get this nice up and down line between the two poi. What am I going to do with this? Oh, goodness. I'm going to do a point isolation, come back out of the point isolation stall by bringing my left hand down around my left hand poi, boom, like so. And once I complete this stall, I'm going to do the point isolation around to get my right hand straight out to the right hand side. It looks like this. Boom. You notice how just like for a hair of a second there, I get that nice straight horizontal line. I'm going to use this to plane break. So altogether, what this winds up coming out as is, as I'm doing this reverse butterfly here, boom, I do my point isolation stall. Right hand poi comes around, boom, tilt up in the point isolation and get into a horizontal plane and take it into a corkscrew, right? And I can make the move repeat. I come out of the corkscrew into those point isolation stalls once again. Now, how about with my left hand? I go around and do that little point isolation to get myself into a horizontal plane and doing my corkscrews. Once again, I come out of it into that point isolation stall, both of my poi hanging down in front of me. Take the right hip poi around. Boom. Take that horizontal moment into a corkscrew. Boom, shook, and stop. And take my left hand poi around into a horizontal plane. That gets me to my corkscrew. And boom, I can return to the point isolation. So the essential things to keep in mind here are that whichever hand is going to go around, you're going from what feels like a down stall to an up stall underneath it. There needs to be a point of contact between the two poi heads, and then you immediately shift the entire shape over about 90 degrees. So you wind up with a horizontal line between the poi heads in your hand, and you need to immediately switch into a corkscrew at that point because gravity has just become your enemy. I suppose another way you could do this is if you want to go around like this and everything, you could turn it into like a horizontal stack fairly simply and come back out of it. But you know me, I like my plane changes here. So I'm a big fan of taking this into a corkscrew personally. I'm trying to think if there's any other interesting things you could do right there. I reckon you could probably also take that moment and turn it into together opposites in spin flowers. You could probably also take it around and turn that into split time same direction in spin flowers. Sky's the limit here. Like anything that's going to get you that nice line where the poi are meeting horizontally in the middle and everything, that's your transition point in and out. This is also one of those moments where like the way that I think about poi transitions has always been almost imagining that like every trick that I'm doing, I'm taking photographs of it where my hands are top and bottom or side to side, and whatever instantaneous position the poi and my hands happen to be, that tells me that there's a transition point there to another trick that shares that instantaneous moment of where the hands and the poi happen to be. So it's just a matter of figuring out what other tricks use those instantaneous moments and going back and forth between them. I think that's something that's kind of unique about my style, but I don't know. Y'all might think that that's pretty typical for poi spinners. I don't know what your impression of that is, but yeah. So to review, we talked about point isolation stalls. That is these moments where we have our hand move a half or a quarter turn around the poi head and essentially bring to a stop all of the kind of forces that are operating on the poi head that might make it drop or spin or what have you. We talked about that you want to kind of do this with the poi being at a point that's no higher than like your shoulder level, but more ideally at the bottom of your chest level as you're going back and forth. And that we're looking to ideally try and land in this line where we have our arms going straight out at a right angle from our body. Unless, for example, there's a reason that we really want to highlight a level change in there. Like say if we want to play around with some negative space, or there's a shape that you're really dying to shoot for that is going to involve like getting an angle between your hands like that and everything. We also talked about one of my favorite point isolation combos right now, which is to get into a point iso from reverse butterfly where we've got these two hands and poi hanging together, go around to an up stall with one hand, and that takes us into a horizontal plane where we do a corkscrew, come out of the corkscrew into those point isolation stalls once again. Left hand goes around into an up stall, and we switch back into our corkscrews after a small point isolation. point isolation stall, go around to an upstall, point ISO into a horizontal plane. Yeah, that one is a personal favorite right now and will likely wind up in an Instagram tutorial in the not too distant future. So, yeah, point isolations, good times. Yeah, so I'm going to go ahead and switch over into Q&A mode now, everybody. I feel like I kind of rushed my way through that, but I did get started late here, so hopefully y'all don't mind. Start sending me those questions. And in the meantime, I'm going to pause for 1 second just to give a shout out to our sponsor. UltraPoi is the reason that this here live stream exists, because they wanted to see me do it, and they were more than happy to try and give me the support I need in order to make that happen. I'm using their Orb Poi LED contact poi tonight. These are my favorite LED contact poi by far. They are absolute workhorses. I have used these poi pretty much daily for probably 2, maybe 3 years now. And they have put up with an extraordinary amount of abuse in that time. And I have no hesitation about taking them out for my video shoots, nor using them on these live streams. They take a licking and they keep on ticking. And of course, they have a really incredibly simple interface for turning on, which I personally find really helpful. The rope is great. It's just about the perfect size for what I do. And of course, they have these wonderful LED handles, which are, in my mind, probably the best LED handles out there in the industry right now. They're very flexible, and you can use them with fire poi. You can use them with LED poi. You can grab any or all of these things by heading on over to ultrapoi.com and using the promo code DrexFactor with a 0 instead of an O at checkout. That gets you a discount on your order, and it helps out the channel. So everybody wins. Make sure to tell UltraPoi you really appreciate them supporting this live stream and supporting me as an artist. Yay. All right, so let's see what kind of questions everybody out there has. Send me those questions. John Collins says, hello. Johnny Maserati says, hi. Donna Kill says, live, loud, and clear. Fantastic. Fantasia Deep says, hi, Drex. Stare it. I'm not sure. Paxton says, what up? Hello. Hi there. How you doing, Stare it? Ballistic with an X instead of an A. Ballistic, maybe, says, hey, how's it going? It's going well. Fantasia Deep, that is creative to use it as a plane break. I'm going to assume that you're talking about that combo I was showing off just a second ago. Yeah, I'm a big fan of that. So here's the thing: is I actually did that on accident while I was flowing out probably 2 months ago, and like I instantly knew that there was something really cool there, but I didn't have the video camera going at the time, and so like I had to try and work back through my head and figure out what I'd just done, and it probably took me a couple days of experimentation before I figured out uh, like the crucial thing is going around and doing that stall, because that's what puts everything in the right position, and it took me a couple days to get back around to realizing that that was the secret ingredient. So yeah, I'm glad you like it. I like it too. Fantasia Deep asks, I have a question about swivels on contact poi. Are they really not necessary? Are they really only good for orbitals? I have yet to find anything that swivels are really necessary for aside from orbitals. You do get a bit of torque working on the tether as you spin your poi and everything. But here's the thing is like almost always the tethers have just a little bit of give in them. Number one, like they can twist a wee bit, but also too, like they usually can, I like as you watch me hold this tether and everything, I'll rotate the handle around and you'll see that like, the anchor for the tether in here and everything is such that like it's functionally a bearing in many ways. It's not a bearing that is particularly smooth, but it still works as a bearing. So whatever whatever torque you put on the tether as you spin, which there is torque that you put on the tether when you spin, make no mistake about that. But it's not significant enough that like the natural tendency of the tether to move around in its socket can't compensate for it. Um, if you're going to play around with orbitals, absolutely use swivels. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to sustain them really. But do you need swivels if you're not going to do any stuff with orbitals? My answer right now is no. I I wish I could tell you yes, because there's always in my head that thing of like, there's got to be like something else that requires this, but I still have yet to find anything that requires swivels when it comes to contact poi, which I'll be real with you is weird to me too. But that's where we are, and I can't wait for somebody to prove me wrong on that one for sure. So. Short answer is no, they're really not necessary. And yes, they're pretty much only good for orbitals, as it turns out. I think the proof of that one was when Flow Toys switched over to no longer using flow cord. Like, if they weren't getting enough requests for people that wanted to use them for orbitals, then the demand just wasn't out there straight up. And there wasn't another use for them. It's one of those things where you can kind of like work your way back from the conclusion and figure out how they got there and everything. So, yeah, sorry to be the bearer of bad news on that. Bearing of bad news. Can I make a pun out of that? Fantasia Deep follows up and says, "But that is good to know. Thank you. You're so welcome. You're so welcome. Keep those questions coming in, friends. I only do this once a month." Pardon me while I hydrate myself, because I struggled doing that this week for sure. um, and also, too, if any of you out there in the chat know of any tricks that make use of swivels that are not orbitals, I would be very, very curious to hear about them. Because, again, I can't think of any. And, the funny thing is you can still do orbitals even without swivels. Depending upon the manufacturer, sometimes there's little enough friction in the handle joint that you can pull off doing a very short orbital, but they're not the like absurdly long 20 to 30-second long orbitals that you can get with fishing swivels on there, which I have fond memories of going to the hardware store and trying to find the most heavy duty swivels that I could to stick on my fire poi. Fantasia Deep asks, "Can you explain your T-shirt? I do not get it." Yes, this is from one of my favorite YouTube channels. This is Your Dinosaurs Are Wrong. Why da? So for those of you who don't know this, I am a massive dinosaur nerd. I have been fascinated by dinosaurs most of my life. And I'm also a total dinosaur snob. I always want to know what the latest research is. And like, I tend to get a little down on like, so my friends will like get me dinosaur toys all the time. And I don't have the heart to tell them a lot of the time that I'm looking at it. I'm just kind of like, this is not anatomically correct. Like, this, the dinosaur's head's the wrong shape, the crest is too small, things like that. Um, and Your Dinosaurs Are Wrong is a YouTube channel that is entirely devoted to this idea. It is a guy who is a part-time dinosaur researcher who people will send him dinosaur toys, and he will go through and he will say everything that is wrong with the anatomy of that toy, and he'll use animations to like basically take a silhouette of the toy, and as he's explaining everything that's wrong with the toy, the animation will get fixed. So like, if the hands are too big or what have you, then the hands shrink down in the animation. If the skull's too short, the skull will lengthen and everything. And watching that silhouette go from being an inaccurate representation of a dinosaur to becoming a more accurate one is one of the most satisfying things I have ever seen. Like, this touches me on such a uniquely strange level that is so unique to me. Um, seriously, if this dude did an episode every single day, I would watch it every single day. It usually takes like a couple months for them to come up with an episode because there's a lot of research that goes into it. But so the reason I have this particular shirt is because it also features my favorite dinosaur of all time, Deinonychus and Tyropus, which is closely related to Velociraptor and technically speaking, the velociraptors in Jurassic Park were supposed to be Deinonychus. And if there's anybody who knows this story well enough in the comments, they're going to chime in and say Utah Raptor. And I'm going to point out that Utah Raptor was not named until they were almost done with production on Jurassic Park. So that is a coincidence. The velociraptors in Jurassic Park were meant to be Deinonychus. They were just scaled up a whole bunch. So Deinonychus is my favorite dinosaur. They did an episode on a Deinonychus toy, and it made me so deeply happy. And when I discovered that they had merch, first thing I did was I went and grabbed a T-shirt from their Deinonychus episode because that is just so many of my favorite things all put together. So I highly recommend you all check out Your Dinosaurs Are Wrong on YouTube because even if you don't appreciate it, it will be one of those things of like, oh, okay, now I kind of get a little bit more about Drex because this is way up his alley. Alrighty then. Yeah. So that's what the shirt is about. Thanks for asking me that, by the way. Um, I will wear t-shirts on occasion when I know I'm going to be on video that I think are great conversation starters. So thank you for asking. And by the way, if you go back through and watch most of my old videos, just know that the t-shirt I'm wearing is almost always intentional. So it's either I had something to say by wearing that t-shirt, or it fit the themes I was talking about that day, or any number of things. But yeah, there's a story behind damn near every t-shirt that I wear on camera. Fantasia Deep says, "Oh, that is cool. Dinosaur snob, pretty unique." Yes, yes, I think that it is a very unique way of approaching the world. Like there's a lot of people out there that just like dinosaurs casually. I am not a casual dinosaur fan. I am here for it in a hardcore kind of way. Sonic Hill asks, "Where is your favorite place to flow right now?" So right across the street from me is Jessup Blair Park. It is a park that borders Tacoma Park, Washington, D.C., and Silver Spring, up on the northeast corner of the DC Diamond. Um, and there's a part of the park that is an old homestead that's been preserved. It's called the Jessup Blair House, and there's a spot right next to it that's paved that like has some picnic tables right next to it and everything. It's really sheltered, so it's kind of hard to like spot from the road or from the sidewalk. And that's where I prefer to flow right now. It's one of those spots that it's like pretty secluded, so I don't feel like I've got a bunch of people gawking at me. It's paved and it's relatively flat, so I feel really comfortable dancing there and trying new things. I have the worst time dancing on uneven ground, which is one of the reasons why I shy away from fire circles sometimes, because the uneven ground tends to mess with my dance sensibilities. And it's really close by. It's a 5-minute walk, and yeah, that is definitely my favorite place to flow right now. But honestly, just I mean, any spot that I find in that park that's open and available, I'll flow out there. Sometimes it's on the basketball courts. Sometimes there's this like little concrete area that's like kind of a crossroads that goes through the park that I'll go flow at. Um, yeah, generally speaking, I just look for a spot that's paved and relatively flat and has enough room for me to move around somewhat. Um, I'm kind of salty that vertical video has become such a thing right as I have like really, really, really gotten deep into my dance journey. because like I want to move back and forth across a stage. And when you're dealing with vertical video, that either means that I'm teeny tiny or it means that I got to letterbox it and there's like a bunch of empty space in the video frame. And that's just annoying to me. So I'm clearly a man at a time when it comes to my dance style because I know that like TikTok and Instagram Reels have been really great for a lot of people that are dancers, but in most cases they're also doing stuff that involves them more or less standing in place and either focusing on what their upper body is doing or just using footwork that doesn't travel at all. Um, there have been some dancers that I've seen make it work to move back and forth. And basically, what happens there is that just the camera tracks them. That gets complicated on some levels, but yeah, maybe I can play around with that and see if it works any better for me. But yeah, sorry, that's a long answer to that question. My favorite place to flow is across the street in Jessup Blair Park, and it's the spot right next to the Jessup Blair house that unfortunately sometimes gets used as a parking space for people that come in. But whenever it's available, that's my preferred spot to flow for sure. Fantasia Deep asks, what actually happened to your double stick journey? I think you had a few tutorials on that as well. Is that still a thing you like doing? I've picked up my double stabs a handful of times in the past few months. The biggest thing that happened with it, honestly, is that my dance journey happened. That like, I got to a point where my poi spinning, where I wanted to be moving around, where I wanted to be dancing with them, and like the thing about double stabs is that they're so like kind of mechanical and mathematical that it was kind of taking me backwards in some ways. It was taking me back to this old conception of what I wanted poi to be for myself. And I found it really, really hard to adapt the way I was dancing with my poi to double stabs, partially because like you don't have to worry about gravity with double stabs, as long as you're holding on to them, it's all good. Whereas with poi, I feel like you're actually dancing with gravity in some ways. Like the entire premise behind dancing with poi is that it's a constant fight with gravity. And I feel like that keeps me honest as a dancer in a lot of ways that I couldn't if I were using a static prop like double stabs. So I'm not going to say never, but I haven't felt called to pick up my double stabs very much recently. And there are some double staff spinners out there that I absolutely love, especially on Instagram. And I love watching them spin. I think their styles are fantastic. They do things that really blow my mind. But at the same time, it's not a style that I'm particularly drawn to doing myself anymore. And so until I can bridge that gap, or I can just tell myself, it's okay to spin your double stabs and not try to dance with them or what have you. Until that can happen, then I think I'm just not going to pick them up that much. Interestingly enough, I have thought lately, though, about picking up fans because I can see making fans work as a dance prop very, very easily, for sure. Good question. Sonic Hill asks, speaking of people gawking, how often does it happen that people will try and engage in conversation or stop and watch you? Stop and watch me pretty frequently. I mean, I was outside flowing for a little while before I came in and started setting up the live stream here, and there were a small handful of people that stopped to watch me as I was doing it. Um, Not as many people that will try to engage in conversation with me. Like there will be some that will be like, hey, what is that? What is that thing that you're doing called? Hey, I've got a friend that does that wanted to try and connect with me in that regard and everything. Um, so I'd say it's like a handful of people that'll stop and watch. And of those people, it's probably like a fifth of them will try and engage in conversation with me. Like a lot of people will see me like, rocking out in the headphones and everything, and they'll kind of think, oh, it's probably rude to ask this guy to stop and talk to me and everything, which I really appreciate. But yeah, it's probably like 1 in 5 people that stop to watch me will then try and engage in conversation with me. And that's certainly not the end of the world. There have been some people where it's been kind of annoying. Like there's some people in the neighborhood that like, when they see me out there flowing and everything, they'll stop for like a real conversation and they'll be like, how's the family doing? Da 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 da. And always in the back of my head, I'm just like, this is kind of my me time, friend. And that's a little rough, but yeah, it's not the end of the world either. Yeah, it happens a lot less than I think I would actually expect spinning in a public park for sure. Fantasia Deep asks, do your neighbors never mind your fire experiments in front of the house, like fire safety tests, etc.? It's funny you should ask that. So, um, so this is going to take a while, but trust me, this will loop back around and make sense. So most of the place where you see me do my fire safety tests and my fire flow videos is a courtyard that's in the middle of my apartment complex. And I really, really appreciate that it's there because it's nice and sheltered from the road. And, I've spun fire out there many, many times. And the reaction for the neighbors is always one of two things. It's either they don't like the noise and they'll just shut their window, or they will they'll think it's really cool and they'll watch. Um, and I'm a fan of that. You know, both reactions are cool. I've never had anybody come out there and tell me, don't do this or what have you. Um, there's a but coming though, and that but is that I think this would have been like a month and a half ago, maybe 2 months ago. One of the apartments in this complex burned down. Not the entire building, just the one unit. But that one unit is literally a charcoal hole in the side of the building. Um, and this happened literally right before I was supposed to do that final sponsored video for Matrix Fire Safety, where I compared all of the fire safety blankets. And I remember when Mufasa came over and everything, we were on a schedule. We had to get the thing done. And there's a very, very specific reason why we chose the camera angles that we did that day. And that is because half of the courtyard behind my apartment complex was filled with rubble from that burnt out apartment unit. And it felt so strange to be filming a fire safety video in that environment. It felt so weird. Um, and I kept being worried that like one of the neighbors would come out and be like, what are you thinking? The apartment just burned down. Why are you playing with fire back here and everything? And certainly like for those of you who saw that fire safety test, there was a moment where we had a catastrophic failure of one of the fire safety blankets. We had a duvetine that not only failed to put out the end of a dragon staff, but the duvetine caught on fire and it became a huge problem in itself. Um, that like that spooked me really, really badly. At that point, I was just like, okay, we got to wrap this up. And the ironic thing is that when I went through to do the edit on that video, I realized that we were missing something. There was one piece of the puzzle that we needed to have. Like I'd reached a conclusion that I was fairly certain was accurate, but I realized we needed to run one more test for me to verify it. And so God bless Mufasa. I reached out to him and was just like, look, dude, it's this one more test that we need to do. It's going to take us 10 minutes, but it needs to happen in the next 24 hours. And, he was a trooper. He came over here, made it happen. We shot it on the tennis court across the street in Jessup Blair Park rather than behind the apartment complex, because at that point I was like, I'm not doing another fire safety test right next to this burnt out hunk of rubble and everything. And so that is why there is one and only one shot of a test happening in that video that does not match any of the others in terms of setting. Um, Still, nobody has complained, and I'm having friends over to spin fire in another week, and we will see how that goes. But yeah, it's really weird. It's super weird. It's a really weird coincidence, and it feels very strange to go spin fire back there, without a doubt. But I've never gotten a complaint from the neighbors either. So I should be clear here that all of this is in my head. 100% of this is going on in my head. I've never received a complaint from any of the neighbors. But yeah, sometimes it's the stuff that goes on in your head that's the hardest to shake, right? Um, yeah. Brendan Reich asks, do you need a permit to spin fire in DC? Short answer is it depends. If you're on private property, probably no. Um, you know, I've gone through DC's fire code line by line, and there's nothing that explicitly forbids spinning fire. There are some things that are fire spinner adjacent that are important in the area. Like, for instance, you know, there's a city fire code regulation saying that you cannot have any more than 10 gallons of a class 1A fuel all stored together at any given time. So that means you can't have more than 10 gallons of white gas stored together, which isn't a problem unless you're going to have a pretty big event. But that was an interesting discovery. And it literally was like the one and only thing is like, okay, I can do that, sure. That said, if you're going to spend like in a park or something like that, it's probably not a bad idea to look into getting an open flame permit um, for that area, which I'm in the process of like working on this right now for an event. And usually what that looks like is you're trying to get a special event permit, and then the open flame permit is something you can get on top of that. But yeah. That said, like if it's your backyard or parking lot in your neighborhood or what have you, it really comes down to like if the authorities get called on you, whether they want to, what, like how nervous they're feeling about it. There's enough leeway in the laws that they can probably claim that you need a permit. There's also enough leeway in the laws that like I and I actually have had this happen before where cops will show up to a fire gathering and the neighbors will complain and everything, and the cops come up and I'll show them the bits of the fire code being all like, we're allowed to have open flames in a backyard, which, you know, that part of the law is there to let people have, you know, fire pits and everything. But, you know, you can argue that it works for us too. Um, and I've totally dealt with cops that like just wanted to have an excuse to be able to go back to the neighbor and be like, they don't need a permit for this, that like what they're doing isn't illegal or what have you. And I've also seen cases where the cops are a little bit less sympathetic and where they do shut down fire spinning and, you know, claim that while there's nothing in the fire code that explicitly forbids it, there's also nothing in the fire code that specifically allows it either. So, short answer is it depends on whom you run across if the cops get called out. And if the cops don't get called out, you know, no biggie, right? Um, I will put a proviso on this. This does not apply both to fire at large outdoor venues, like at, you know, if you're at a warehouse party or something, or to indoor venues. You do need the permit to spin fire indoors in DC. 100%. You are not going to get away without that. Um, so, yes, once again, I'm giving you a very long answer to a very short question. The short answer is it depends. If you have a specific kind of set of circumstances in mind, let me know in the chat, and I might be able to give you a more specific answer. Fantasia Deep says, such a weird coincidence. I'm assuming that is with regard to the apartment across the way that burned down. Yeah, yeah, it really is a weird coincidence. I tell you too, like I was actually out while this happened, and I came home and just found fire trucks set up all around the block and everything. The fire was out at that point already, and I went out and looked out the back porch and everything, and I would just see the cops, like, or not the cops, but the firefighters, like literally just shoveling the rubble out of that apartment so that anything that, I mean, I assume that this is why, but that anything that might still have embers or charcoal in it and everything gets taken out of the building and exposed to the open air and everything so it can cool down. It was wild watching a half dozen firefighters literally just shoveling stuff out of the apartment behind me. And of course, they're still in the process of repairing that apartment. It burned clear through the roof of the building. You could look straight through it to the other street. It was so wild. But yeah, they've gradually been fixing all of that back up, and but it's still super weird. We'll see how it feels to have a fire jam right next to that spot in the coming week. We'll see how that goes. Yeah. Anyhow, Sonic Hill asks, "Do you get into a rut from time to time? If so, how do you work on getting out of it, poi wise?" Yeah, I get into ruts all the time, honestly. Um, it's one of those things that one of the most important lessons that I learned very, very early on in poi spinning was that, like, if you want to get better at something, it's your job to show up and do the work every day. Whether you feel like you're making progress or not, you still have to show up and do the work every day. Whether you feel like you're in a rut or not, you still show up and spin. Even if you feel like you're not making any progress whatsoever, you still go and put in your hour in. And what that will result in over time is that you'll slowly start chipping away at like you'll polish the things that you learned in your last creative burst. You'll all of a sudden you'll open a door to something that you didn't even know existed. Like, earlier in the year, I remember there was a person on Instagram who was asking me about 1.5s, and in trying to answer the question for her, I like had an oh my god moment, and I realized that there were 1.5s that we had never seen before, simply by tweaking a couple of the parameters in them and everything. And that was super exciting. That was like some of the first tech nerding out that I had done in years. Um, and, in the intervening time, it's not like I hadn't been doing tech, but like I had got gotten into areas where getting down a new trick would take, the better part of a year, if not more. Which again, you show up every day and you chip away at it. Um, a lot of people will tell you to put it down and walk away for a little while and then come back to it fresh some other time. I don't believe this. I honestly believe that if your goal is to is really to master the thing, and I realize that's a problematic term, and I'm sorry, I can't remember what the alternative use to that is right now, but you know, um, you show up to do the work every day, whether you're feeling it or not. And the investment of time that you put in not only chips away at that rut, but also like it becomes its own reward after a while, straight up. Uh, DQNT try to, don't try to, says hi. Can you maybe make a vortex tutorial? Gotta go now. See you. I have no idea what a vortex is. Sorry. My bad. Fantasia Deep says, thank you. It's always interesting listening to you. Hope you have a nice weekend. Yeah, sure. Hope you have a nice weekend too. And if you're curious, like, in terms of how I found this approach to practice and everything, there's a book you should pick up. It's called Mastery. The author's name is George Leonard. Reading this book changed my life. It changed my approach to practicing things. And so go read that book, and you will then understand how I approach practice now and why words like motivation, plateau, and rut no longer mean to me what they used to. It's really, really, really good advice. And I feel really lucky that I read that book when I did. Johnny Howard asks, what trick takes a year? I'm actually working on a trick right now that's taken more than a year, but to give you an example, let me switch back to the full body screen here. So the last trick that I got down that took a year, it actually took more than a year, um, was doing gunslinger inspins in, oof, hang on, I'm too close to my backdrop here. So the gunslinger anti-spins I'd had down for a while, but I also wanted to get down the in spins, which that took me some time. Um, and as you can see, these unfortunately are something I don't practice nearly as much as I should. But this took me a year and 3 months to get down. The one I'm working on right now actually is it's gunslingers in split time same direction. And the idea is basically to go top bottom with it, going back and forth with spiral wraps. And I'm getting there. Like every little bit of that has been such a challenge to get down, but I'm getting there slowly but surely. I'm hoping I will have that trick within this calendar year. Keep your fingers crossed for me, everybody. Fantasia Deep says, I have read Mastery and I accept the plateau. Yay! Good, good, good. Learn to love the plateau. It honestly, I think, is like some of the best advice I have ever gotten in my life, for sure. So yeah, Sonic Hill, go ahead and pick up a copy of Mastery. You will not regret it. I am not even joking when I say that book changed my life for sure. Cool. So I know that I started this live stream late, so I'm going to say that I'm going to give this 5 minutes before I shut it down. So get those questions in. If anybody wants to, I would really appreciate, if anybody's interested, I will prioritize your questions if you like leave a tip via super chat or what have you. Um, it helps out the channel. All of it goes directly to me. I don't think YouTube keeps any of it. But yeah, we'll go ahead and start winding things down here. Fantasia Deep says, because you mentioned the book before and then I read it 2 years ago. Fantastic. Oh, I even inspired you to read it. That makes me so happy. Yeah, I mean, I honestly, I think I would recommend that book to literally any flow artist. Especially because like the number of times I get asked by people, questions that are the answers are in that book and everything. I feel like kind of a fraud or like a broken record saying all the time to people, it's like, don't trust motivation, trust discipline, learn to love the plateau. What do you do when the action slows down and you find yourself in a rut? Keep on working, keep on showing up to do it and everything. Keep on finding new ways to do old things. And I mean, I feel like sometimes the answer I should just give people when they ask me any of those questions is just go read this book. The answers are there. The answers are all there. But yeah, I'm super super glad you read that book, and I would recommend to literally everybody out there watching that you read this book too. Again, the title is Mastery, and the author is George Leonard. Actually, I can just pull it off my bookshelf right now and show you if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, here we go. Um, so I have owned many, many copies of this book over the years because what I will always do is I will lend this book out to friends and I will tell them, I don't want the book back. Keep the book. I'm going to get another copy. I want you to read this book and I want you to reread this book and I want you to get everything you can out of this book. So, yeah, highly recommended. Highly, highly, highly recommended. Cool, cool. If anybody wants to get in a couple last questions before I shut this thing down, we've got just a couple minutes here. And I'm going to use those couple minutes to once again give a plug to our sponsor. Tech Tips is brought to you by UltraPoi. I've been using their OrbPoi LED contact poi tonight because they are my favorite LED contact poi. You can grab a set of these on their website at ultrapoi.com. Use the promo code. I'm going to drop this in the chat. I'm going to drop this in the chat here. Use the promo code DrexFactor with a 0 instead of an O at checkout. That gets you a discount on your order, and it helps out the channel, so everybody wins. Thank you to UltraPoi for sponsoring this live stream and giving me an excuse to do it. Yeah, thanks so much to UltraPoi. Fantasia Deep says, I left a copy of the book at Leviathan Studio. Yeah! Oh, you're my hero. I hope many flow artists find it as well. Good job there. Good job. I appreciate you. I appreciate you for doing that. That's awesome. Okay, well, it is 10 past the hour, which I think takes us to a full hour for the live stream and everything. I'm going to go ahead and shut this down. I need to go eat and, yeah, also chill out and work on fixing my sciatica here. But yeah, thank you all for tuning in so much. Thanks to UltraPoi for sponsoring this live stream. If any of you want to sign up to support the channel, you can go over to patreon.com/DrexFactorPoi and do so. I hope you all have a wonderful weekend, and I will see you again the second to last Friday of the month for another live stream in August. Yeah? Awesome. Take care, everybody. Have a good night. Have a good weekend. I'll see you all soon. Peace.